our work itself can be a part of our worship.
Yeah.
So the actual work and the words we say with our mouths, we can embrace both of those things as part of God's work in the world. And so the first thing I would say to these people is learn how to embrace your work as worship to God and love to your fellow man, right? The we have a whole teaching on the Old Testament word for work, which is avodah. Avodah is used 145 times in the Old Testament. It's used synonymously for the word work or labor. The word worship means the same thing, and the word service, right?
Wow.
So all three: work, worship, service.
Welcome back to the Young Adults Today podcast. I'm Josiah Kennealy, your host. We are so glad that you're here. Today, my wife, Micah, and I are diving into a conversation with Erik Cooper about something that we all wrestle with, how faith and work fit together. We talk about finding purpose and gospel impact in your everyday work, overcoming the sacred secular divide, and living out your faith authentically no matter what you do. Be sure you subscribe. That way you're tuned in, part of the Young Adults Today family and ecosystem. You'll never miss a great conversation with guests like this. And as a thank you for joining today's conversation, we've got a free gift to you. Our ebook, 10 Steps to Starting a Successful Young Adult Ministry, is available to you as our gift, free, in the show notes wherever you're tuning in. And this will help you reach more young adults for Christ in your community and in our world today. Let's check out today's conversation with Erik Cooper right here on Young Adults Today. Welcome to the show. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, thanks for having me.
For sure. Erik, there's a scene. Have you seen the movie The Greatest Showman by chance?
Oh yeah. If you haven't, you need to go out and run it right now. So
It's a great movie. P.T. Barnum, for the listener viewer, there's this scene where P.T. Barnum, he's this visionary, this dreamer, and he's working a job, and he goes to sharpen his pencil, and he looks at all of his coworkers, and it's this beautiful cinematic panning scene where he looks at his coworkers who are lined up in their workspaces, and then he looks at the cemetery that's like just beyond, the building, and he gets the ship sunk and the business closes that day that he's working for. But I think that so many people that we talk to, when they think about life, when they think about their work, they feel that feeling when it comes to their work. And we're going to be talking about the theology of vocation. I know this is a passion point of yours, correct?
yes, we talk a lot about that here. Yeah.
What goes through your mind when you saw that scene, or when you know that there's a young adult or a young leader listening who feels maybe this disconnect of faith and work? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, my heart definitely goes out. I think we have unintentionally created in Christian circles. I do think it's unintentional. I don't think we taught this overtly, but we've created a scenario where there's a bifurcation of our lives. There's a dualism that's been created, right? And so what we get up and go do every day to make a living in the marketplace, we've never done much to connect the dots between that and the faith that we hold so dear to us, right? And so I think a lot of young adults, especially people who are early on in their career, they get up and they go to work every day, and they embrace it with a sense of purposelessness, or maybe they embrace it with a sense of passion, and it becomes the driving force in their lives. But it's still separated, right? It has nothing to do with my faith, and so it's like, well, I'll go volunteer at the church. I'll sing on the worship team. I'll go on a lot of overseas missions trips, or I'll work in kids ministry. That's my sacred ministry. But this thing I do every day, Monday through Friday, is separate. It's secular. It's separate from my life in Christ, and so I think that has done a lot to create a sense of purposelessness and meaninglessness for a lot of people when it comes to their everyday work. And I don't think that's the way God intended and designed it.
Yeah, I remember being earlier in my 20s and just really thinking through like everybody asks you when you're in college, what are you going to do? What do you want to be when you grow up? And it's like, does anybody really know what they want to do and be when they grow up?
Yeah.
But I remember I worked as an admin, and I'm very good at administrative work and I can get tasks
Mm.
done. But like sitting there 40 plus hours a week was literally just killing me because I'm just like, I'm trapped behind this desk. I'm making a
Yeah.
difference internally, but does filing papers like this actually impact God's kingdom? Like, does this really matter? In 100 years, will this matter? Because there's something stirring up and bubbling in me that is more knowing that there's more on the other side of whatever that might be. And I remember I reached this point where I was um, you said yes to an internship, started helped some friends start a young adult ministry in the local church, ended up getting on staff. And I remember that switch in my mindset, or the shift of I don't have to go to work, like I get to go to work. And I couldn't wait to get up when my alarm went off, 5 a.m., went and taught a class at a gym. After that class, I would go to church, and I was like, this is purposeful work, working with young adults and seeing life transformation. So for the person who's like on a college campus, or they're leading college ministries, or just working with a young adult who's in that career path, but they really have no direction, a lot of young adults are asking, why does work actually matter to us? And I would just love to hear that. How can we shift our mindset from, I have to go to work because I need to pay my bills, to I get to go to work and God is like asking me to steward something? How can we, as young leaders, encourage people in that place? And why does our work actually matter at the end of the day?
Yeah. Well, we talk about this within the context of what we call the great story. How do we find our work in the meta narrative of Scripture, in the meta narrative of God's story, right? So if we zoom out, the Bible is not just intended to be this instruction manual, where we go to like an encyclopedia, right? Like if we zoom out, we really look, and it's a story, right? It's a story, and theologians would call the four chapters of this story: creation, fall, redemption, restoration, right? You may have heard this, the meta narrative of Scripture. And I think we have to. I think a lot of times when we sense that purposelessness, it's because we're trying to create our own story through
Mm-hmm.
our work. So we're the hero, we're the main character, right? And we really need to put ourselves into the meta narrative of God and realize that God's the hero of the story, and we get to play a role. I tell people, you're a beloved member of the supporting cast in this cosmic narrative that God
Mm-hmm.
has been telling since the beginning of time. So to find purpose, we need to understand our work within the context of a story that is bigger than ours. And so we really take people back to Genesis 1 and 2 and 3, right? And so if you look, I mean, what blew my mind, and I'd never thought about this in context before. No one had really ever. I'd never really heard anybody preach a sermon on work theology until I was probably in my late 30s. And so it was kind of disrupting to me to say, well, in the beginning there was work, right? Like before, like at the dawn of time, there was work. That work was in the Garden of Eden. And so if you look at Genesis 1 and 2, we see that in Genesis 2:15, that God placed the man in the garden to work it and keep it.
Mm-hmm.
So our work was always part of the plan. And you look at Genesis 1:28, it says that God made us in his image, and then he put us here to form, fill, and subdue his creation. So I tell people, you were created to be in a partnership with God in the care and cultivation of his world. We partner with God. We're like in a joint venture, right? And so if we understand that work existed before the fall, then I think we can ask better questions. Um, because I think so much of what we experience when it comes to that purposelessness comes from what happened in Genesis 3. Yeah, Genesis 3 brings, thorns and thistles. It brings struggle and toil. It separates our work from its original design and intent. And I always tell people, it distorts our work. It creates a distortion in what our work was actually created to be. And so I think really, if we're going to encourage young adults, we have to get our theology right. We have to go back and understand that work was always part of God's design, that work was impacted by the fall, but that through Christ's redemption and restoration, we can go back and begin to bring some of the taste of what God originally designed, uh, back into our work, right? We can begin to reconnect the dots in a way that brings gospel purpose to what we do each and every day. So I know that's kind of a heavy weight.
Good. That's so
That's kind of
good.
a heavy weight. So if you want to unpack that some more, we can. But I think to really understand that, I thought, gosh, work. I mean, my first job out of school. You were talking about your first job out of school. I have an accounting degree, and I laugh now because I'm terrible at accounting. But it goes back to that. It goes back to that sense of purposelessness, or that sense of I've got to figure out what I want to do. Right? Like I gotta get this figured out. I gotta choose a major. All of that. So I found myself working for a CPA firm right out of college, and I was an auditor. And my first Christmas on the job, I was in a freezing cold warehouse on Christmas Eve, 3 stories up in a scissor lift, counting widgets in this manufacturing company, right? And I'm taking a widget out of one box and I'm putting a tick mark on a piece of paper. I'm putting it into another box. And I'm freezing, I can't feel my fingers, and it's Christmas Eve, right? And I'm going, I am doing this work because Adam and Eve sinned, right? Like I would never have said that, but like work felt like punishment. This is punishment. This is not purposeful. I did something wrong to end up here, right? And I love to joke with people that I'm a recovering accountant. I've been clean now for about 30 years. But I think if we look at work through the lens of our personal experience, and we don't understand, wait, there was an original design, then we don't have the words or the picture to reframe what we're doing on a day in and day out basis through the lens of what God's original intent was. So,
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. So you were mid to late 30s, you said, and you heard a message on the theology of work. Do you remember? Was it at a church? Was it on a Sunday? Do you remember where that was?
Well, I think it was a podcast originally, and then it led me to a book that really messed with me a lot, called "Every Good Endeavor" by Tim Keller. So I think I heard Tim Keller preach a message on the marketplace, and some of it for me, it happened because I spent 12 years in full-time ministry. So I started out in the business world. I was the accountant. Then I took a very unexpected detour, was not planning to go into ministry, was not looking to go into ministry, but my wife and I ended up on staff at a church for an incredible season of life. I wouldn't trade it for anything. And then we planted a church.
Wow.
So we spent 12 years in full-time ministry. And then the board of our organization now asked me if I would come here. And I haven't really given you the background of that yet, but at the core of what we do here at our organization is a real estate company. And so we own, manage, build, construct apartments and assisted living facilities, and then all of the profits go to global missions work. So that's kind of the core of what we do. And so I found myself, going from preaching and discipling people and doing things that were so clear, like you didn't have to do much mental gymnastics to connect the dots, right, between your everyday ministerial work and God's work in the world. And then I was renting apartments. Right. And so I'm sitting at my desk and I'm like, well, what in the world does renting apartments have to do with the kingdom of God? And I heard this message by Tim Keller. I grabbed his book. I devoured his book. And for the first time in my life, some of these principles, like work existed before the fall, like work is a partnership with God. Work is a way we can fulfill the great commandment each and every day, right? Through the work of our hands. Work will be part of our heavenly future. We have the ability through the redemption and resurrection of Christ to bring back a little taste of that from the future into the present, right? So I'm reading all of this stuff from Tim Keller, and it's illuminating the purpose and meaning to the apartment business, to dealing with all of the issues of leases and angry residents and construction deadlines, right? And all of that stuff. And you start to run it through the lens of, again, this meta narrative that this is part of God's work in the world, that we are an extension of God's work in the world through the everyday work of our hands, right? So that was that original message that really blossomed into just this reawakening for me that, hey, the marketplace is part of God's work in the world. It's not some separate secular part of my life. We can and are called to bring these things back together.
It's amazing. Scott Linebrink is a retired MLB pitcher. And I'm reminded because on this podcast, he shared the story of bouncing around teams because you
Yeah.
can't control where you pitch
Yeah.
or who signs you or, how long your career even lasts. But he gave his life to Christ, and then he retired from baseball, met the Lord, and then he was really in that existential crisis of like,
Yeah.
okay, I'm 30 and change, I'm retired, whatever that means. I've got a family, marriage and kids, so there's some assignments, but what do I do with my life now?
Mm.
And I think
Yeah.
some people call it a quarter life crisis, some people call it a midlife crisis, but a discipler of his actually gave him the same book, Every Good Endeavor, by Timothy Keller, and it
Yeah.
revolutionized his thinking. And a massive part of his testimony was connecting those dots, Erik, from okay, another former MLB pitcher grew up in the church, or I grew up in the church. Dick Stigman pitched for the Twins. He's probably 90 years old. At breakfast, I wanted to hear what was it like playing in Major League Baseball. He goes, Josiah, there was so much life after baseball.
Mm.
So much life after baseball. And you might be listening, watching on YouTube, and saying, like, I'm in a sweet season. Like, Erik, you had those 12 years where you said it was a really special season. And then sometimes God makes a decision for us. Other times, organizations make a decision about our future or their future that doesn't involve us. And you know what? It is all a part of God's plan. And I think also the workforce has changed in my vantage point in that very few people start out unpacking and documenting widgets and finish in that same role.
Yeah.
Do you have thoughts on the revolution of the career force, the workforce, as it relates to somebody in Gen Z that might have 5, 6 jobs by the time they're 30, and how God is
Yeah.
still at work in all of those?
Yeah. It's interesting. I'm Gen X. I'm 51. I'm starting to get the senior discounts at the restaurants when I go
I
now.
saw that you posted that.
Yeah, that was a real wake up call for me. But that's a story for another day, right? So I'm kind of in that middle ground, right? Like the generation before me. Um, I have a number of mentors and friends, maybe the generation before me, that were with one organization,
Mm,
maybe two, but usually one career path, right? Like, and now, I mean, not only is Gen Z dealing with multiple careers by the time they're 30, they may have multiple careers at the same time, right? Like this whole fractional work kind of thing. I mean, you could have two or three jobs kind of working together just to try to make ends meet. And so it's a little, I like to think Gen X was the best generation because that's what Gen Xers do. We are very proud of our generation, but it's interesting for me to see that now. So not only is it fractional, it's moving quickly, um, but it's remote in so many different ways. And so, how do you get a sense of culture and connection? And so, yeah, I feel for Gen Z in many ways, and my colleague Bill Tibbetts does a lot more work with young people than I do. But I think there's some real challenges there. So I think the key is this would be what I would say the key is you need to understand your calling doesn't change with your job.
hmm
So if we really understand, again, if we zoom out and we understand that we all, as followers of Jesus, really carry the same calling.
Yeah.
The word vocation that we use for like, what do you do for a living? What's your job? What's your vocation? Oh, I'm an accountant. I'm an engineer. I'm in ministry. Whatever. The root of that word vocation is vocare, the Latin word vocare, which means calling. And that was such a revolution for me because my calling as a follower of Jesus, I love to tell young people, your calling will not change even if you have multiple different assignments. We are called as followers of Jesus to worship God, to love our neighbor, to make disciples of all nations, right? Like, so that calling rests on me in the marketplace, whether I'm counting widgets, whether I'm a music pastor on staff at a church, whether I'm a church planter, whether I am renting apartments or developing apartments, that calling stays the same, even if my assignments and my job descriptions change. And so that would be my encouragement to Gen Z is when you really can embrace, hey, look, marketplace work is not detached from my faith. So how do we weave these things back together again in a holy, God honoring way? Then my job, no matter what it is, from sweeping the floors to the C-suite, man, it can be part of God's mission and work in the world because we all share that same vocare or vocation.
Beautiful.
I love that. And just taking it like one step deeper, I'm just curious, like, what are your thoughts on how do we as church and ministry leaders, or how does the church particularly um, disciple and equip members of the church and individuals Monday through Saturday work, and not just make
Mm,
Sunday a day of worship and you like get to put a different hat on for that moment, take it off, and then walk out the door? Like, how can we
yeah.
be equipping people to share their faith, live on mission in the workplaces that they're currently planted?
Well, my encouragement for my pastor friends and I've so many of my closest friends in the world are pastors of churches, and I feel for them because there is a huge burden when you carry that ecclesiastical pastoral ministry, and you're running an organization yourself. You know, you have staff, but you've got to inspire people to get involved, to work kids ministry, to staff volunteer positions, and work youth ministry and
Mhm.
sing on the worship team and all of those things, right? And so we can begin, and I say this because I spent 12 years as a pastor who was pulling into my orbit constantly because we needed it, and that's good. That's what the
Yeah.
body of Christ is supposed to do,
Yeah,
right? So
absolutely.
so I always tell people, this isn't about lowering that push, but we also, I think, as pastors, we need to we need to we need to believe in the marketplace, right? We need to connect our theology back together. And I'll never forget one of my dearest friends about 6 or 7 years ago, pastors a large church here in Indiana. He invited me to speak on this topic at his church. And when he introduced me, they were doing a 3-week series. I was kicking it off on work in the marketplace. And when he introduced me, he said to his congregation, I owe you an apology because I've been your pastor for almost 25 years, and it never even occurred to me to talk about where you spend 50% of your waking hours.
Wow.
So that, I think, is the first thing, right? If we want to disciple in our churches for the Monday through Saturday work, not just Sunday worship, the pastor really needs to get a heart for this. The pastor really needs to awaken to this. And I think a lot of pastors, and this is understandable. That's why I don't say any of that with any kind of condemnation in my
No,
heart.
not at
Hmm.
all.
This isn't about lowering the bar on how vital the life of the church is. This is about raising the bar on understanding how vital the other 6 days of the week are in the life of the average believer who works in the marketplace. And so the first thing I would say is, if we're going to disciple marketplace Christians to embrace their marketplace work as part of God's work in the world, the first thing is the pastor has to buy into that. That would be my I guess that would be my short answer to that question.
Hmm.
You're dead on the money. I wonder why Timothy Keller, why his sermons and books are actually being discovered more after he's passed, and maybe even during his lifetime. And one of the
Yeah,
things that he did, though, is he stayed and made himself available. He was very accessible to the congregation, which was, by the way, 90% or so young professionals. And
yeah,
so I think one of the things he did so excellently is he realize like, whoa, there's a category called, man, apologetics, where people have questions about God, theodicy, the problem of evil, pain, and suffering. And he wrote a great book about it, where he realized, like, whoa, marriages aren't happening in New York City as much as they are in other
Mm-hmm.
parts of the other communities. We have so many young professionals that long to be married. But I'm going to teach, he taught the meaning of marriage to single adults, and it's the meaning of marriage. The other category or bucket, and there's others that he touched on so well, but he realized so many questions came to him about work and
Mm,
vocation. And so to teach on the topics that people are actually struggling with, helping
Mm-hmm.
them connect their faith, that's so important
yeah.
and central to all of us. But it does move beyond the pew, beyond Sundays, into the 24/7 orbit of life. And I think that you're so on the money to just say that, um, man, I think of the pastor in Indiana, like you said, to say, like, I think it's so important and vital that we teach people about
Mm-hmm.
how their work does matter and
Yeah.
how
Mm-hmm.
it's part of God's plan for really his design. And did you
Yeah.
have something?
Well, I was just thinking of one question that I think we get a lot coming from young adults is I think it actually stems from a lie they believe. And I think the lie that they've discovered is I'm the only Christian in my workplace. I'm the only
Mm,
Christian in my workplace. How do I live out my faith, let alone share my faith? So I think
yeah.
just even just bringing that to the surface as we open up conversations for young adults to process some of those things within their workplace, like how do I live on fire for God when I work in a secular environment when there's a lot of toxic behaviors, because they're going to stand out and they're going to feel uncomfortable because they're not participating in some of the things through conversation, through after work invitations, after
Yeah.
parties, whatever that might be and look like. So I'm just thinking through like, how do we encourage young adults to share their faith in the workplace or not be ashamed of the gospel while
Mm,
they live out their life by not cussing and swearing, not drinking and getting drunk with their coworkers after hours. Um, yeah, having the rule of three that you're never in a vehicle with the opposite sex, so there's no room for anything when you're taking work trips across the globe. Like, so I'm just that's where my mind went. So I don't know, Eric, do you have any thoughts about
mm,
maybe some fallacies that we believe when it comes to we're the only Christian on
yeah.
staff? Like,
Yeah, and I'm very empathetic to that, because I spent about 5 years in the marketplace. 2 or 3 of those were in a situation much like you describe.
Mm-hmm.
And then, I spent the next 20 years really in environments where I could be very open about my faith, very relaxed about my faith, right? And so when you think about that, like even one of the questions I get a lot is, if I talk too much about my faith, I'm going to end up in HR, right? Like I'm going to end up
right.
down in the
Yep.
HR office. So I have to be careful. And, I do think um, there's two sides to this equation. We always talk about, we want to be people of proclamation. Um, and so many of our missionary friends would say, if we don't accentuate proclamation, we will lose proclamation, right? Like it will go away. So we have to be people who testify to what the Lord has done in us. But I think there's a difference between that and feeling like you got to go be a salesman for Jesus all day, every day,
Mm-hmm.
right? So if we press pause there is this whole creation mandate side to work that I think does feed into this conversation. That if we understand our work itself can be a part of our worship.
Yeah.
So the actual work and the words we say with our mouths, we can embrace both of those things as part of God's work in the world. And so the first thing I would say to these people is learn how to embrace your work as worship to God and love to your fellow man, right? The we have a whole teaching on the Old Testament word for work, which is avodah. Avodah is used 145 times in the Old Testament. It's used synonymously for the word work or labor. The word worship means the same thing, and the word service, right?
Wow.
So all three: work, worship, service.
Beautiful.
The Old Testament Hebrew
beautiful.
word for work encompasses all of those things, right? So when you go to work every day, the first thing I would say to you is embrace your work as part of God's creative work in the world. Reconnect those dots first. Whether it is, Martin Luther said you could sweep the floors to the very glory of God,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Like, learn how to do the spreadsheet and engage the sales meeting as part of God's work in the world. So what is it? What is the redemptive value that I can create to work, worship, serve through the work of my hands? Then on top of that, we have to be people of proclamation. And so, I think just looking for opportunities to show up when we serve, when we embrace our work as worship, it's going to create opportunities for conversation with people, and hopefully in ways that don't land you in HR, right? um, so, I think people will be genuinely curious when we embrace our work the way God has designed for us to embrace work. And then you show up, you look for people who have needs, and you ask them, you take curiosity in their lives as human beings. And I think all of this can work together to create a witness at work, if that makes sense. So
So good.
Man, there's a pastor friend of ours who has taught his community of churches to say that if anyone is ever like new to the area, if anyone is ever, you overhear somebody talking about like an unexpected experience, like, wow, I didn't see this coming. Maybe it was a tragedy. But those are great opportunities to offer prayer or offer a
yeah,
deeper like faith on ramp of a conversation. Do you have any others that you'd add to that? Like, of course it's our work is our brand, is what I'm hearing you
sure,
say, like our personal brand. So it's excellence, it's service. But then man, if somebody's new to town, befriending them, showing them a good lunch spot,
yeah.
building that rapport. Maybe somebody didn't expect how hard it was going to be to send their child off to college or something like that. Any other thoughts of great on ramps for people?
Well, let me just tell you a story that I just heard this weekend, right? So let me tell you a story through somebody else's perspective. It was a fantastic story. I was preaching at a church on this topic over the weekend up in Lansing, Michigan, and this young 20-something shared his testimony. And he met a new guy who had come into work, and I think he was part of his like onboarding or training. And the guy was like super like fidgety while they were sitting there having a meeting. And he said, man, he goes, can I have 5 minutes? I need to step outside and vape. My body is just really struggling right now. And so he's like, sure, man. So the guy has to go out and take a hit off his vape, and he comes back in, and he's like, man, I am trying to kick this habit. I really am trying to kick this habit, but I am struggling big time. So this guy opens up and just starts sharing, hey, I used to have a lot of bad habits. I struggle with those too, right? So that immediately they have this like personal connect. And then the guy says, yeah, he said, I've been trying different religions to see if I can get over this. And he said, right now I'm trying Hinduism. He's telling his coworker this. I'm trying Hinduism. And he said, I think I need to call my shaman and talk to him about this vaping problem. He said, but I gotta wait and save up some money because he charges me every time I call him. And this kid, he just kind of laughs, and he leans in and he goes, how about I be your free shaman, and you can talk to me. And so this guy just starts opening up about
Yeah.
his life, and he's
Yeah.
able through this experience to share his faith, right? So it's kind of an out there
Yeah.
moment, but I think if we're attentive to
Right.
these things, and if we're prayerful, I'm telling you guys, if you pray the prayer as you're heading into work today, Lord, just let me be available. Let me be available. You are already at work in these people's lives. You are already at work. I just want to partner with you and what you are doing in their lives. You pray that prayer and you make yourself available, you better hang on, right? Like, you better hang on for the opportunities that I think will come your way. I pray that prayer sometimes when I'm getting into an Uber or I'm getting on an airplane, and I almost always regret it because I'm like, now I got to have a 60-minute conversation with this person because they're pouring their life out to me, right? and I mean that in jest, right? Like I don't really regret it,
Yeah.
but if you pray and say to the Lord, I'm available, let me partner with you today, not in the work of my, let me partner with you through my work, and let me partner with you in what you want to speak into the lives of my coworkers today. I think you'll be shocked at how many opportunities come your way.
Mhm. I agree.
I read about a university president who each year during his presidency, what he did is he would find a different 2-week job. And so he would go and be a plumber, or he would go and be
Mm,
a
Like
substitute.
undercover boss kind
Yep,
of.
a substitute
yeah,
teacher, or he'd go be an
yeah,
auto mechanic, and or he'd go take a checkout line job at a local convenience store. And the reason he did that, it didn't impact the school, the college at all. But he never wanted to forget what it was like. He didn't want to
yeah,
become the isolated individual in the high tower. And I think that whether it's picking up a side hustle, having something that's fun, a community meetup in the marketplace, whatever it is, I think for those um, to be able to relate, and I think what you just said too, the availability,
Hmm.
posture, and prayer to say that,
mm.
you know what, I'm gonna be attentive to the Uber driver, those serving me at this restaurant. Everywhere I go, I'm gonna
Yeah,
treat that as the watering hole, this marketplace. Facebook, I'm buying this couch, and I'm gonna treat the person with respect, ask them, have it be a less awkward experience than it needs to be. But I think that I love what you said, that challenge of a posture and a prayer to be available.
Hmm.
That's beautiful.
yeah.
Hmm. Yeah.
Be curious, be curious with people, ask them questions. And people love to talk about themselves. They love
Hmm.
to talk about themselves. We do.
Hmm.
I just and you don't have to ask them deep theological questions, at least not when you're first getting to know them, but just ask them about their life, ask them about their family, ask them about their journey. People love to share their story. And when you're genuinely curious, right? I think you will find people will open their hearts to you. And
Yeah.
then you just ask the Lord for the right words in those moments, to be salt and light, to them. So,
I think that's so good. I have one final question before we get to the 5 and 5. And Josiah and I've been talking a lot about like how do we, as ministry leaders, not allow ministry to become a god in our life or to become
mm,
overtake our family or our own personal walk with Jesus and just worship that role that God has given us and He can easily take away. But just looking at the American culture, like there's only one thing you're rewarded for when it comes to addiction, and it's the busyness of your job that you tie your identity to so
Yeah,
deeply.
workaholism. Yeah.
And you get bonuses, you get extra time off, you get high, you can move up the chain of command and all those different things in the pyramid and org charts and everything. How would you encourage the maybe pastor or the ministry leader today who maybe unfortunately has put ministry above family, ministry above kids, unknowingly, because it's easy to do, because we can live on mission going out for supper, but if we start serving the house better than our own home and
Mm.
start mixing up that, how would you encourage us not to become addicted to the busyness of work and the reward that we see on this side of eternity, and not neglect our family or our own personal futures or desires for marriage or children somewhere down the road? Do you have any insight for
Great
the
question.
listener?
um,
It's a tension to
yeah, this is
manage,
a,
right?
no, it is a tension to manage, right? Because I think sometimes what we can ultimately end up doing is, we can fall off in the ditch on both sides, right? And so I guess what I always encourage people to do is work and rest were always intended to be dance partners in our lives, right? And so, and I say this to you as someone who's not great at this myself, right? So I guess I'll confess that first and foremost. But what I've seen is I we've said, okay, we overwork, we work too hard, we're addicted to work, we're addicted to all of the that side of the equation. So what we do is we turn work into the enemy because we have to like push it, we have to push away from it, right? And so I think in our hearts we can create this good bad kind of scenario with things,
Hmm.
or we see people who don't work at all, right? And it's like, well, they're just lazy, right? So we push away from that moniker. I don't want to be called lazy. I don't want to be called idol. And so what we end up doing is creating enemies on one side or the other. And really, these things were intended to be embraced as beautiful, God honoring things, right? But you mentioned that whole idea of idolatry, and when I talk to people about idol worship, they're like, I don't worship idols. That's what people in Eastern countries do, right? Or that's what people did in, and we look at that. I always find that the Exodus story fascinating to me, right? Like all of this miraculous stuff happens to get the Israelites out of Egypt, the sea parts, and there's a pillar of cloud and fire, physically present. Their food's on the ground outside, right? Like when they wake up every morning. I mean, they've got the tangible presence of the living God right there in their midst. And what do? They take off all their gold jewelry. They call all and they take off all their jewelry. They melt it down. They make a golden calf and they bow down and worship it. And I always read that story and I thought, what is wrong with these people? These people are idiots, right? And then the Lord taps on your soul and he says, you do the exact same thing, right? Like we do the exact same thing. So I think being attentive to how easy we become idol worshipers in our lives. And when I say, and this is important because idol worship is not about elevating bad things in our lives. Idol worship is about elevating good things to positions that they're not supposed to hold, right? Mm-hmm. So whether that's we can idolize our work, we can idolize our family. Mm-hmm. I've seen mothers that make idols out of their children, right? We can make idols out of anything. So the challenge is understanding it's about getting these things in the right order and making sure Jesus is at the center, right? And so when it comes to just, I guess, not bowing down to the idol of productivity, and I feel like such a hypocrite even as I say this because I'm I'm in a master's degree course right now, and we're talking about this very thing, and we're all kind of confessing to each other like, I don't do this well. I don't do this well, right? This idea of surrender, this idea of not defining my life by what I produce, this idea of finding my identity in Jesus and then letting my work be the overflow from that. I believe all of these things, but putting them into practice is hard. And so that's why I think we need to talk about it and we need to hold each other accountable. We need to have good community around us that can tap us on the shoulder and say, hey, I'm a little worried about you. I don't think you're, I don't think you're getting enough rest, or I think you're elevating things to a point that they shouldn't be in your life. You can enjoy these things, but let's enjoy them in the right hierarchy. Good. So anyway, I don't know if that answers that question, definitely. But it's definitely what's resonating with me. And I would just confess to you, this is something even at this phase of my life, I continue to struggle with.
Yeah.
What you said there of like idolatry isn't elevating bad things. It's putting good things in
proper order.
In the wrong order. Yeah.
That's dead on the money. Are you up? How are you doing on time? Do you have 5 minutes if we do the 5?
Yeah, absolutely.
We'll go
absolutely.
Rapid fire. So
sure.
Question we ask every guest on this show, Erik, is why do you believe that young adult ministry, why is that so vital in today's day and age?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the obvious answer is next gen is the future, whether we like it or not, right? So, but, I think one of the things, I joked with you that I'm getting the senior discounts now when I go to Culver's. Not happy about that at all. But, you look in the mirror sometimes, you're like, how did I get to be 51 years old? Yeah. So I still feel like I've got a good amount of runway in front of me.
Yeah.
But fruit has a season, right? Like my generation has a window here, and we're gonna be forgotten. I mean, that is something. There's an old quote from a guy named Count von Zinzendorf. Has that for a name, right? He said, preach the gospel, die, and be forgotten." Right? Like there is an aspect of my life that no matter how much I do, I mean, even some of the greatest people in the world, 100 years from now, nobody's going to remember their names, right? Mm-hmm. So, what we in part to the next gen is our legacy, not our name. It's not about remembering me. It's about remembering who Jesus is. We've got to pass that down, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think just understanding fruit has a season, right? Like it's harvested, and then it's time for the next the next crop to grow.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's humbling. And so, I'm trying to have those conversations with peers right now and say, hey, let's make the most of the season we have. But there's going to come a day when that baton has to be handed off, because we're going to die and we're going to be forgotten.
Mm-hmm.
How's that for encouraging, right? Hey, glad I
Morbid
listened to that
truth.
podcast with that. But it's really a glorious truth, right? Because
Right.
our glory is in the glory of Jesus,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like that is my purpose. My purpose is not that you will remember Erik Cooper, that you will remember the stone table. My purpose is that the next generation will know the goodness of God in Christ, and that is the baton we hand down, and we make sure they hand it down, and they hand it down, and they hand it down. The global glory of Jesus is all that matters.
That's so good. Okay.
Amen.
Second question. This is like the curveball. If you could ask Josiah and myself any question under the sun, what would you want to know today?
You're now the host of the Young Adults Today podcast.
Oh, I saw that you sent this question to me ahead of time. I don't have a great answer for it. I guess it's like Jeopardy, right? Like I'm asking, my answer is to ask the question.
Yeah.
So, one of the things I guess I've been contemplating, we do a lot with marketplace, but we also do a lot with global missions. I mean, that's really the heart of what we do is global missions.
Yeah.
We do it through the marketplace, right? So, how do we keep, how do we keep in this culture? We hear a lot that Gen Z is one of the most cause-based generations out there, right?
Mm-hmm.
How do we keep Gen Z connected to the centrality of the gospel proclamation, because there's so many other causes out there to chase. And with social media, it's the distractions are constant, right? Like to run and care about all these different things. And there's good things out there in the world, but how do we keep Gen Z passionate about the centrality of the gospel as we move into the next generation? Does that make sense as a question?
That's a whole
Yeah.
podcast in and of itself. Yes. I would say then the simple answer that I would say, involve them. They are so
Mm,
innovative. They have so many ideas. They have so much passion. A lot of young adults
mm,
I've been coming across lately want to work for nonprofits. They may have majored in youth or young adult ministry primarily, but they're like, I feel led to hold up the arms of other leaders and learn for a season of my life. So
mm.
I think it's mentoring. I think it's discipleship. I think it's putting Bible study and Sunday school back in the church. If they are approximately 2% biblically
Mm.
literate, and if that's the number one statistic that we've come across, like if that is the problem of not being biblically literate, then why have a majority of churches removed Sunday school or events of studying true scripture? Like I see the problem and I'm like, well, here's the solution. We remove the thing that we need the most and saying this is the problem now. So I would say involving them in the
Mm.
process and not being scared to allow them to be a leg in the race instead of being on our deathbed and saying, here's my baton. No, like you've had a leg the last 5 years and I've been discipling you. Like you've had a role to
Good.
play. So that's where my mind goes in a short answer right there. But
That's good,
Josiah, what else
Micah.
would
That's
you
really good.
My
unpack?
gosh, where you went with mobilization, like Louis Giglio says this, and it's hard for me to unhear. The Church of Jesus isn't built on the talents of a few, but the sacrifice of
Mm,
many. And I think that so many young adults, like the time is now too, to have these conversations from pulpits about why your work matters, to have great Bible teaching. If Bible sales are up among Gen Z and church attendance is up, but they're longing for communities to belong, I
mm-hmm.
think they need an invitation to involvement or an invitation to mobilization.
Mm.
Because if not, we have the greatest cause that they're disconnected from, and they will make idols of other causes. To
Yeah.
your point earlier, and um,
but they're passionate. They're passionate not only about the cause, but it's like photography, videography, social media. So it's like they could utilize their skill set and their calling within the context of church, missions, nonprofits, whatever that might be. And it's just like, wow, if we could instill the opportunity of purpose within them
Yeah.
and allow them, hey, 11-year-old, here's my $3,000 camera, take some shots at this next event. Take a risk. You know what I mean? And it's like, we don't know who we could be offering the next platform, altar call, Billy Graham in our life, or Timothy
Yeah.
Keller, or whoever. Like, we might be just a little piece of their story, but we don't know the implications of that invitation. And one thing I'll say, I'll end with this with our question,
Mm.
the realization, I think pastors and ministry leaders, marketplace, wherever you're at, to realize every single person is one invitation away of breakthrough. Every person is
Mm.
one invitation away from a relationship with Jesus Christ. Even though they might have denied the invitation 10 times, the 11th time might be their invitation that they received to enter the pearly gates. So I just think
Mm.
living life out loud in a non crazy way, I think people observe.
Yeah.
And if we can include them at the table and say, hey, there's always room for you at the table. We want to leave people and places better than we found them. And we want you to be a part of that story. And it's, if you want to disqualify yourself or you want to say no, I don't want to say no for you.
It's good.
And the last thing we want to say no is say no to and for a generation that's dying to be asked. So that's
That is good. Your last statement there, the generation that's dying to be asked, to include them. I think that's a beautiful challenge for all of us that are getting senior discounts at Culver's. So
Erik, there's been so much encouragement for young leaders, but do you have any encouragement on your heart? There's so many young leaders who tune into this podcast and maybe they're dealing with challenging leadership themselves or trying to just navigate their way as a young adult, leading other young adults. What encouragement might you have for them?
yeah. One thing I love to tell young leaders is don't confuse fame and following with gospel influence. They're not the same thing. Um, I love to say fame means lots of people know you. Gospel influence means somebody's closer to Jesus because they know you, right? And so, I think there is this understandable desire today to build giant platforms. And, I think chasing those things is scary. And I think even scarier is making those things synonymous with leadership is scary. So, spend more time at tables with people. Get used to the work of the gospel that moves through image bearers, spending time with image bearers. And, it's funny to me, I'm on a podcast, right? So I'm not downgrading. I'm not downgrading the platforms that social media has created for us. I am saying, though, understand that your influence will most likely be, your biggest influence will most likely be across tables
Beautiful.
from other people. So,
That's so
yeah.
good. Okay, last and final question. What is the most important lesson that God has taught you throughout the last couple of
Mm,
years?
you know, um, this is going to sound silly, but it's going back to the root of the gospel. I think so many times as leaders in Christian spaces, we can forget what's at the root. And so I would say Jesus is the hero of the story.
Yeah.
And we don't grow up and out of our dependence on Jesus. We grow down and deeper into it.
Oh my God.
And so as a leader, it's kind of different, right? Like you guys are raising young kids right now, like you're teaching them to be more and more independent of you, right? The gospel is the opposite. The gospel is teaching us to be more and more dependent on Christ. And so the gospel is not me becoming independent. The gospel is me becoming more and more dependent on Jesus. And so I have just become enamored again and again and again with the core of the gospel, that Jesus is the hero of the story. that God is not at the top of a ladder yelling at me to climb up to the top. He is at the bottom on a cross declaring, it is finished. And so that is the core for me to preach that gospel to myself every day. And so that would be one thing I would encourage every leader to get good at, is to hang on to Jesus. He's the hero. It's his work for you, not your work for him. That will be the fuel for everything beautiful that comes out of your life.
Amen. So good.
Eric, thanks so much, man. That's incredible.
Well, guys, I'm so grateful for what you're doing, and let's just keep doing our best to point each other to Jesus. I mean, I think at the end of the day, that is all I've got. Hang on to Jesus. He's faithful. He's worth it in every season of life. Hang on to Jesus, and let's keep pointing each other back there. So thank you for what you do.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Hey fam, before you leave, while you're here, we want to give you a free gift. It's our ebook, 10 Steps to Starting a Successful Young Adult Ministry. The link is available for free in the show notes, wherever you're tuning in. That's 10 Steps to Starting a Successful Young Adult Ministry. And if you're looking for more, be sure to subscribe wherever you're tuning in. You'll never miss amazing conversations about AI, the future of the church, Gen Z, millennials, young adult ministry, and we've also got a Facebook community that you should join. It won't be the same without you there, where 2,600 young adult ministry leaders gather, exchange ideas. You'll also want to follow along the journey on Instagram. Visit Young Adults Today. We'll see you back soon. Thanks, fam.